Good morning and welcome everyone to our Friday Diversity Podcast. Today we are here with a very special guest, Dawnita Wilson, who is the Vice President of Diversity Inclusion at JBG SMITH. Throughout her 15-year career, Dawnita has been responsible for leading and developing diversity and inclusion strategies focused on culture change, competency building, employee engagement, communications, and strategic partnerships. She has also held previous leadership roles at Sodexo, Highmark Health, and UPMC. Dawnita, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate you having me.
So let's jump right into it. Diversity has always been an important initiative for companies, but with the current events that's happening, what is different this time?
I think diversity and inclusion in theory has been around for some time. However, I have been in this space for almost 15 years now, so I've definitely seen and experienced the work evolve and become more prevalent within companies over the past, say, 5 to 7 years, and even more so over the past several months in response to the external climate and specifically the racial injustice that continues to plague the Black community. So I know everyone has been immersed in that over the past few weeks, months. I definitely think it's impacting how people are viewing the work. So I would say that while diversity and inclusion may have been a priority to some companies, many have either become more aware because of current events or are feeling more pressure to respond because of those events. So I would argue that diversity and inclusion has been and should have always been important to companies, particularly forward-thinking companies.
And how are your employees responding, and then how do you as a leader respond?
I think in times like these, employees respond in different ways depending on how they're impacted. So I think in the workplace, it's important to create safe spaces for employees to engage and share their voice, especially if you're committed to building a more inclusive organizational culture. For instance, at my organization, I recently launched a Diversity and Inclusion Employee Roundtable series and kicked it off with our Black Voices session. So it was an opportunity for our Black employees exclusively to engage in dialogue and share how they are feeling, and more importantly, share how they are feeling with each other. So it provided them with a platform to speak up and speak out about what's important to them. And it also allowed me to gather feedback around what we can do better to support them going forward, and also get some additional feedback to inform our broader diversity and inclusion strategy. So I think as leaders, it's important for us to speak up in times like these. I think it's important for CEOs and C-suite leaders in the organization to do the same and provide opportunities for our employees to do that as well. I think it's the best way to really demonstrate your commitment, and I think more importantly, to let people know that you care.
And for those companies who don't have D&I people and or leaders, what advice would you give them?
Well, my first recommendation would be to consider hiring a D&I leader. I think to really do this work well and to do it effectively, it needs to be strategic. And it's not just a program or an initiative. So as with any strategic business objective, I think you need the right skills and the right experience. So just as you wouldn't hire a CFO with no financial experience, it doesn't make sense to hire a D&I leader with no D&I experience. So I think for smaller organizations that don't have it in their budget necessarily to hire a full-time diversity and inclusion leader, I would recommend engaging with experienced D&I consultants, folks who can help you build out your strategy and build something out for you to be able to execute. There are a lot of great consultants out there, but I think just being intentional about getting the right subject matter expertise around building out a strategy and at least helping you launch your D&I journey, something that's important.
And how can companies become more proactive and move that needle?
Initially, focusing on some of the low-hanging fruit within your organization. So things like integrating diversity and inclusion into, existing systems, practices, and processes is a great place to start. I think examining where the opportunities are to embed D&I into the way you do business, asking yourself questions like, do you have a strong D&I presence on your website? Do you talk about D&I in key meetings and town halls? Do your employees hear your leaders reiterate the importance of D&I and how important it is to the business? Is it discussed during new hire orientation or during your exit interview processes? So I think those are a couple of key ways, is to really look at what's existing in your organization and where are the opportunities to embed D&I into those things. And I think then, of course, things like your talent process, where are you recruiting from? How are you developing emerging talent once you get diverse talent in your organization? You have a pipeline of diverse talent to consider for future leadership opportunities. A lot of organizations, when you start to get to the more senior ranks, you see less and less diversity. And so what are you doing to be intentional about how you're creating that pipeline? What are you doing to get there if you don't have that pipeline? And then I think finally, do you have diversity and inclusion goals established? I think it's as simple as establishing goals. Have you assessed and analyzed your workforce and data trends? What is your plan to impact change? I think is really what it comes down to. So, ultimately the essence of diversity and inclusion is cultural and behavioral change. So you have to be intentional about how you achieve that. And I think intentionality is the only way to really move the needle. And that all starts with leadership commitment and accountability from the top.
Well, Dawnita, thank you again for taking the time to speak with me today on such an important topic.
Absolutely. And again, thank you for having me.